Hi, welcome to Board Gems. This is my regular video series in which I cover older board game gems. I'm keeping my voice a little quiet because it's late at night and other people are sleeping, so I brought the mic really close. At the time of recording, and hopefully by the time this video comes out, there is a campaign on Kickstarter for a game by Roxley Games, yay Canada, for a game called Skyrise. And this is a sort of a new version, although the publisher insists it's a completely different game. But it's basically Metropolys. So I want to cover Metropolys. And it was requested, so it's a good opportunity to do Metropolys. It was designed by a Swiss designer, Sébastien Pauchon, and he is probably most famous for Jaipur, but also for a game called Ispahan, which was also by the same company that published Metropolys, a company called Ystari Games. They're no longer a separate entity anymore. I think they were absorbed into the Asmodee umbrella. Mid to late 2000s, when Ystari was forming, that all their games, not all of them in the end, but they're definitely at the beginning, all their games had the letters Y and S in them. So that's why you see Metropolys spelled this way. It's for 2 to 4 players, ages 8 and up, and takes 30 to 60 minutes. Age range is where I would disagree a little bit. I would put it at the 10 and up category. The rules are quite simple, but it's one of those games that has simple rules, but it has a lot of depth. And I find for these sorts of games, you probably want to have a kid with a little bit more maturity. And honestly, I don't think an 8-year-old is going to find this game all that fun anyway. So I would say probably 10 and up. The game does come with rules for like a family version and an expert version. And the family version is a little bit simpler, but it's also less interesting. So you should probably just jump right in with the expert variant. So the expert variant would be a 10 and up game, but that's probably where you want to go with this game. While it's simple enough for families, it's more of a light, thinky game. The story goes, and I had read this anyway, but the designer also mentioned it in the rule book, so this is a time where I'm able to confirm my memory. Sometimes I have these like memories of reading somewhere some story, and I was fortunate enough that I was able to confirm this just by reading the rule book again. Sébastien Pauchon was looking at the rule book for a game called Goa, designed by Rudiger Dorn and published by Hans im Gluck. And he saw a diagram. And you see a diagram, and without knowing how the game works, sometimes you see the diagram and your mind jumps. And that's the case with Pauchon. He saw the diagram, and he said, "Oh wow, that's really interesting." But then when he kept reading, and reading the caption for the diagram, further reading the rules, he realized the game didn't work the way he assumed. But the way he assumed was interesting. Let me show you how it plays, and then we'll talk about why Metropolys is still a gem today. To set up the game, place the board on the table between the players. Give each player all the buildings of a particular color. They are numbered from 1 to 13, and they come in 3 different heights. Each player will get all 13 buildings of a particular color. If you're playing with fewer players than 4, then you're going to block off part of the board. You'll see there's 5 districts separated by the river. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the peripheral districts, and then there's the central district. You're always going to play with the central district. You're going to play all 4 peripheral districts in a 4-player game, but in a 3-player, you're going to remove 1, and in a 2-player game, you're going to remove 2. I would recommend taking some of the cards you don't use in the game and using them to just block off any peripheral sections that you aren't using. But we're going to set it up for a 4-player game. These are the tokens that will start on the board. there are 4 different types, but these yellow ones don't go on the board. You're going to remove certain ones based on the number of players, but in a 4-player game we're going to use all of them. Mix them up as best you can and just randomly seed the board. Each of the peripheral districts are going to get 5 tokens, and the central district is going to get 7. The only real rule is these dead-end districts that only have 1 neighborhood adjacent to them, and the rest is water, those don't get a token. But all the other neighborhoods may get a token. Just kind of spread them out as best you can. It doesn't really matter which way they face. The back just shows how many points they're worth. You'll need to decide whether you're going to play the family game or the expert game. First of all, the expert game isn't that expert. If you're the type to watch board game videos, you will have absolutely no problem with the expert edition. And I would say unless you're playing with very young kids, which I wouldn't recommend playing Metropolys with very young kids, honestly. It's just, I don't feel like it's their type of game. So for what it's worth, I would stick with the expert rules as the normal rules. However, the main difference is which objective cards you use. So you can actually kind of customize the game a little bit to your preference. For example, I prefer the family variant objectives over the expert variant objectives, but that's personal taste. Anyway, I'm going to set it up for the expert version. So there's 2 different types of objective cards in the expert version. These gray ones, each of them shows a particular color of neighborhood. You'll see there's 5 different colors of neighborhoods. Mix these up, shuffle them up, give 1 to every player. Any that are left, put to the side, sight unseen. You're also going to do the same with the secret objectives, which will give varying points based on patterns or building near certain things. In the family edition, it's always building next to a certain thing, but these ones are harder to pull off but are worth more points. Anyway, choose which one you want to use, mix them up, again give 1 to every player. They look at it secretly, do not reveal to each other. Any that are left over go out of the game. There's 2 cards you're going to put to the side. The Metro card and the Archaeological Site card. They're good and bad. These are worth points at the end of the game, depending on who possesses the card. And you're ready to begin. The goal of the game is to score the most points. During the game, you're going to be placing buildings on the board. And when you're placing buildings, you may be able to pick up these tokens, and you may be getting points at the end of the game based on where your buildings are and how tall they are. The player aid, there's only 1 player aid for the whole game, shows the various ways of scoring points. This is the expert version. In the 5 districts, the player at the end of the game who has the tallest tower, keeping in mind that there's 3 heights, so we're not talking about the number, we're simply talking about the height of the tower. The player who has the tallest tower in each district will score 5 points. For every of these purple tokens, that means it's a trendy neighborhood, those are worth 3 points. The Metro tokens, subway stations, they're worth 1 point, but the first time someone picks up a Metro token, they also get the Metro card. Whoever owns this card at the end of the game will score 3 points, and it will always go to the player who has the most Metro tokens. The reverse, the negative version of that, are the archaeological sites. Now you look at these gold symbols and you think, oh, those are pretty good, I want those. You don't want these, because each of these is worth -1 point at the end of the game. And just like with the Metro card, the player who collects the most will get this card, and whoever owns it at the end will lose 2 points. In addition, each player has a secret color. In this case, the red neighborhoods. At the end of the game, every building you have in a red neighborhood is worth 2 points. And finally, there are the fancy pants objectives, which will score you a varying number of points, 4 to 7. Determine a start player. Play as clockwise. The start player takes any one of their buildings and places it on any neighborhood that does not yet already have a building, which at the start of the game is all the neighborhoods. Each neighborhood can only have one building built on it. The player starts the round, which is sort of like an auction. They will pick any neighborhood that they want and place one of their buildings number side up on the neighborhood, like so. This building is not built yet, that is just a proposal. Then going clockwise, a player may place in an adjacent neighborhood, again, that doesn't already have a building of a higher value, or to pass. If it was red's turn, red could put it somewhere like this, for example. 5 is higher than 1. They do not get this token yet. This is just, again, a proposal. Now it's blue's turn. Blue could continue or not. Now note, it's a little bit hard to see on the board, but these are bridges, and the bridges denote adjacency. So let's say it was blue's turn, and blue's thinking, oh, I want to get one of these purple tokens. So let's see, let's get this one here. So that's the proposal. Now it's 6. Now let's say it's white's turn. White can pass or bid a higher building. Once a player passes, they're out for the round, and the round will end when all players have passed except for one, or nobody can outbid the last bid, either because somebody built or bid the 13, which is the highest bid, or they put their proposed building in a neighborhood that doesn't have any open neighborhoods next to it. For example, white could place here. This is a dead-end neighborhood. You'll see there's no neighborhoods adjacent to it that don't already have a wooden piece in it. So in this case, the round is immediately over. Nobody can outbid it, at which point the round is over. The player who placed the highest bid takes the building and flips it over, and that means that this is built. All the other bids go back to their owners. If there was a token in that neighborhood, which there isn't, but if there was, they would take that token. And you never lose tokens during the game. The player who placed the building in the last round then starts the next round by taking one of their buildings and again placing it on any empty neighborhood. An empty neighborhood being one that doesn't already have a wooden piece in it, either as a bid or an actual built building. So let's go through another round. You can see how it works. It's gray's turn. Gray's gonna stay in. Gray can build either here or here. Maybe they want the metro token. Now all these neighborhoods are worth negative points. Maybe at this point, gray passes, and then it's red's turn. Red says, you know what, I'm gonna get in here. Maybe in my case, I have green as a as a secret color, so it's actually worth positive points for me. Of course, they wouldn't say that out loud. Red's gonna try it. Red's gonna bid. Blue passes, and it's back to white's turn. Say white bids here, and now everybody's out except for red and white. White's the only other player in. Let's say they pass, so red wins the auction. They flip their building over, and they take this token, which as you can see is worth 3 points at the end of the game. And all the other bids return to their players. And red starts the next auction, and you rinse and repeat. The game will end when one player has all 13 of their buildings built on the board. So we're not talking about bids, we're talking about actual built buildings. And then you go through the scoring. You look at each of the 5 neighborhoods in turn, and for each neighborhood, you look and see who has the tallest building. Ties are very common. In the case of a tie, it's the player who has the most of the tallest types of buildings. And if that's still a tie, then you look at the next highest building and compare those. So if it looked like this, red would have the highest building in the district, because even though there's a tie for tallest building, red has the most tallest buildings. if this was in fact a medium, then blue would be the tallest. Because it's a three-way tie for tallest, then you look at the second tallest, at which point, of those tied players, blue has the most medium-sized buildings. Gray is not in the running because they don't have a tallest building. So the player who has the tallest building, or the most tallest buildings, however you want to phrase it, gets one of these tokens, which is worth 5 points at the end of the game. Players will score 3 points for every trendy token, that's these purple ones that they've collected. Every metro token is worth 1 point, and the player who took the most, or the first player to collect the most in the case of a tie, gets this card, which is worth 3 points at the end of the game. Likewise, for the archaeological site tokens, each of these tokens is worth -1 point, and the player who has the most, or the first player to reach that number, gets this card, and it's worth -2 additional points. And then each player reveals their secret objectives and scores points accordingly. If this was a player's 2 secret objectives, they would get 2 points for each of their buildings that was built in the matching color, in this case brown, and they would get 5 points if they are able to have 3 of their buildings next to a lake. If it looked like this, and these were blue's secret objectives, for this district alone, they would get 4 points for having buildings in the brown neighborhoods, and an additional 5 points for having 3 buildings next to a lake. And they score those points every time they match that objective, although each building can only score for an objective once. So total up your points, and the player with the most points wins. In the case of a tie, it's a player who managed to build the most of their buildings on the board. If it's still a tie, it's a tie. That's it. You're ready to play Metropolys. Oh my, this is a clever game. It has a really great ratio of decisions to game length. Like, it feels like a dense game in that the decisions, it'll come around to you often, and every decision, every time your turn comes around, you usually just have maybe one decision, although it's a two-dimensional decision. You're deciding whether to pass or whether to raise. And if you're raising, you're deciding not just by how much, but where to raise it, where on the two-dimensional space. It's a fascinating game. I don't know of another game quite like it. At the beginning of the game, it feels very wide open. You can do kind of whatever you want. And as a result, I find that the beginning can be a little bit, a little bit long, a little bit plodding, because, people are going to start a bid, they're going to start with a low value, and then people are going to raise with another low value. Maybe people don't want to jump, because if they jump because they want a particular space, and that maybe tells people something about that player's objectives. So those first few auctions, in my experience, and I wouldn't say I'm a great Metropolys player, but my experience is that those first several auctions take a while, because the values gradually grow and the auction gradually snakes around the board. And then when it stops, there's just one building placed. Board is still very wide open, and so you start the process again. And it's only after you get about maybe a third of the way through and you have like a bunch of buildings on the board, then the decisions become more interesting, because the board is more limited and you're deciding where you want the auction to kind of end up, knowing that it's going to kind of sneak through existing buildings and maybe potentially to that dead end over there. And it's been described as a spatial raw. I'm not going to bother explaining what raw is. It is a pretty famous board game. It's a spatial auction anyway. It's a fascinating idea that in order to raise, you're actually changing what's up for auction. And in this two-dimensional space that everybody's working within, there is no luck in the game. It's all the random layout of the token. So there's a randomness in the initial setup, as well as, of course, the random objectives that each player has. It is kind of one of those games. I'm not actually a big fan of this kind of game normally. Games like Takenoko, Wasabi are some examples. Masons, which has been requested. Takenoko's been requested too, but I don't think I'll do it. The idea with those is that there's a shared space and everybody is working on their own personal objectives and they're getting in each other's way in the shared space, but the points aren't coming from the shared space directly. Like, everything is about your objectives. And so the middle is just this mess that everybody's changing up. Not the case with Metropolys. There are secret objectives, but there's also a lot of points available in the game, just from the tokens you're picking up, as well as trying to have the tallest buildings in the neighborhoods. And the secret objectives are important, but there also aren't that many of them. So, for example, in the expert game, you have one random objective, which is the color of neighborhood, that will give you bonus points at the end. And you have a secret objective, usually by trying to get a certain pattern, maybe 2 buildings across a bridge from each other, or 3 buildings around a fountain, that sort of thing. But there's only 5 of each type. And if players know the objectives, then that becomes a part of the game. You see, you might be tempted to think that the more objectives, the better. Okay? So you have a 4-player game. Each player has 1 objective, and there's only 5 available, let's say. You might think, at first glance, that's bad. That's not enough variety. I want a big deck, 30 objectives, 60 objectives. And so every time you play, you're getting different objectives, and it creates a lot of variety. And then you're getting away even more from interacting with the other players. When you have a small number of objectives, and you learn them, then that becomes an important part of the interaction, because you're watching all the other players and you're trying to guess what their secret objective is. If you think a player is winning, and you also think that they might have the objective that gives them bonus points if they have 3 buildings next to a lake, and they already have 2 buildings next to a lake, you may want to outbid them and make sure they don't get that 3rd building. Of course, they may not have that objective. The family variant has very simple objectives, which is they're always worth 3 points, and they're very simple things, like building a building next to a bridge. 1 building next to a bridge, 1 building next to a fountain will be worth 3 points. And that's the only scoring besides the tokens. When you have the expert variant, they change those objectives, but they also add more things. You have the objectives of everybody has their own secret color, which is great. Everybody is competing for having the tallest buildings in each district. That's great. Yes, you want secret objectives, but you don't want just secret objectives. Then everybody's playing a kind of solitaire game, even if it's on a shared space. You want there to be competition on the board. So people are competing for the open objectives, but they change the other objectives to make them more difficult and worth more points. So instead of getting 3 points for having a building next to a bridge, you might score 4 points for having 2 buildings on opposite ends of a bridge, as an example. Like, at first glance, I think that's fine. Like, obviously, I liked everything else about the expert variant. To me, having the hidden colored neighborhood objectives and having the tallest building in each district are absolutely necessary. So, of course, the expert variant is the way to go. The problem with the expert objectives is that some of them are very difficult to pull off, and some are easy to pull off. Now, the ones that are difficult to pull off are worth more points, but not that much more points. Like, the easiest ones to get are worth 4 points, and the hardest ones to get are worth 7. Personally, I actually like and prefer the family variant objectives, but with the other expert variant scoring. So you got the family variant cards, so just simple 3 points for being next to things per building, and 2 points for being in the neighborhood of your color, and tall building scoring per district. Absolutely essential, that one. And as far as I'm concerned, you have a great game. Like, it's nice that you can tweak it a little bit, but it's a shame that, to me, both the family and the expert are not as good as they could be. Things are going to be worth different things for different people. That's what you want in an auction game. And the bidding will change depending on the district it is and whether you want to put your tall building, maybe you want to beat your auction or, outbid the last player with an extra tall building, taller than you need, but you're trying to get that tallest building in the district bonus, right? Maybe another player is not in the running and they don't have to worry about that for that district, right? It's worth different things to different people. And even though the purple tokens, trendy tokens, are just straightforward 3 points, a little bit boring, but they're fine. But the other ones become important, are great, the metro tokens and the archaeological site tokens, because even though you're scoring or losing 1 point per token, you're also deciding, is it worth it if I can also get that scoring card at the end, right? Like, if I have 2 metro tokens and my opponent has 2 metro tokens and the metro card, I may want to bid higher to make sure I get a 3rd metro token that allows me to take that card. And the negative points for the archaeological sites are good too, and it kind of helps with learning, or trying at least to intuit what people's objectives are. Because if people put down a bid in a location with an archaeological site token, well, they're going to lose a point. So there must be a reason they're doing that, right? That they're hoping to get more points. Maybe that's their color, or it helps with an objective or something. So again, helps you kind of piece that puzzle together, or at least think you can. If somebody else has 2 archaeological site tokens and the card, and I have 1, maybe I don't worry so much about getting a second one, because I know I'm not going to have to take that card from the player. It's -1 point, but that's all it is. But if we're tied and they have the card, I definitely don't want to take another archaeological site token, because it's not just -1 point, but then I have to take the card from that player, so it's -3 points if that card is still in front of me at the end. All these things add up and they mesh really, really well. And it makes for a very unique game. Really, I can't think of another game like it. There's lots of auction games in the world, but an auction game in which the auction is changing during the auction, in terms of where, what's up for bid, where is it going? Maybe I want it to go this way. I don't care about this, but I'm hoping it'll still come around to me, and by that point the auction will have snaked over to where I want it to go, right? Oh, just really great decisions in a very kind of small time frame. The box says 30 to 60 minutes. Yeah, probably. It's probably about 15 minutes per player, at least for experienced players. I would say maybe more like 20 minutes a player if people are not that experienced. And it's pretty close anyway. But it's it is something that, a game that players could suffer a bit from over-analysis. To me, the auctions remind me the most, actually, of not an auction, but a climbing card game. A climbing card game would be, famous examples are sort of the Chinese card games like Big Two and Dodi Chu. Hobby games that are of that same ilk would be Chimera, Tichu, Clubs, a number of others. I guess the reason it reminds me of a climbing card game is because you want to get out early if you can. And in almost all climbing card games, there's a big benefit to going out early. In Metropolys, the benefit to going out early, besides just kind of controlling the pace of the game, is you have all your buildings on the board. The other players don't. you're more likely to get points from your buildings. You have more buildings on the board. Hopefully you're going to score a little bit more in the neighborhood scoring. Maybe you're more likely to get their objectives, or the other players, if you end the game early, are less likely to complete kind of their objectives. Deciding when to use your high-valued cards in a climbing game versus your high-valued buildings in Metropolys is a very important decision. And you have that sort of flow in the game where you're winning a bid, presumably with a high-ish value, but then you're leading with a low value. Look, it's not climbing game, the board game, but there are some similarities in terms of some of the decision points you have to make. And if you like climbing card games, I'm not saying it's very, very similar, but if you like climbing games, some of the qualities of a climbing card game you may find also rear their head in Metropolys, which are some very interesting decisions in those games. Now, when this game came out, it was generally regarded as a good game, but it was a little bit divisive. And the reason was the board art. The players' buildings are just a stark, solid color, red, white, gray, and blue, which feel like a good combination. I'm not colorblind, but that seems like a good colorblindness aware combination of colors. But those colors are very stark. And of course the buildings are just straight rectangles. The art on the board, by contrast, is low contrast. Does that make sense? The whole thing looks kind of muddy because, like, all the neighborhoods, even though they're different colors, they're all kind of the same level of brightness. And you have the rivers, which are kind of a greenish blue, and you have the lakes, which are blue, that it's a little bit lighter, but it's not super bright. The important things don't stand out very well. I guess that's why I call it muddy. Like, for example, inside the neighborhood, they have these lovely detailed buildings, but the bridges on the board are just these simple straight lines, and it can be a little bit hard to notice them unless you're looking for them. They just don't stand out very well. When you combine that with the bright colors and the stark rectangle shapes of the buildings, it feels like it doesn't match. There's like a disconnect there. The buildings are clear, easy to read. I mean, the numbers are in a font that's a little bit unnecessarily artistic, but for the most part it's fine. Certainly the buildings' heights are, to me at least, seem very obvious, and the player colors are obvious. So overall, they did a good job with the game. But have a look at the art. The art is gonna turn a bunch of people off, and it certainly did when this game came out in 2008. This might be the best game Ystari has published. Now, Ystari at the beginning was probably most famous for Keyless. Keyless is not my type of game. A lot of Ystari games were, to me at least, they always felt like they were less than the sum of their parts. Ystari was a game company that was, to me, to my observation, really seemed to be at the forefront of the design philosophy of adding more complexity just to make it more complex. And I'm not saying the games were crazy complex, but they went in the opposite direction, whereas a lot of what we would have called the German games, right, they would have taken a game that was maybe bigger and longer and then removed some of the parts that didn't seem to be all that fun to get the length down, to make the game simpler, but still had the same feeling, and the most important decisions were still there. I just removed all the extra cruft. In Ystari, I felt like they loved the cruft. They wanted to put possibly more cruft on. Like, this part we're not sure is enough. Let's tack on this other stuff. So a lot of their games were like that. Metropolys is one of the few games of theirs that I can think of that didn't feel like it had one mechanism too many. Everything in Metropolys feels like it belongs. And there isn't really unnecessary cruft in the game. It's a tight, compact 30 to 60 minutes. The decisions are interesting and they're frequent, and every single decision matters in this game. And there's lots of objectives, lots of little ways of scoring points, but I would think taking any one of those away would make the game worse. So, for my tastes, Metropolys is probably the best game Ystari has ever done. Metropolys is a game that really has a good bang for your buck. If by bangs you're talking about decisions, and by bucks you're talking about time. Maybe that's the way I'll describe it. That's not very convincing, but let's go with it. Anyway, I really like Metropolys. It's a recommendation as long as you're okay with the art and the building sizes. It's fine with all player counts, 2, 3, or 4, and this is one of the rare auction games that will work 2-player. There really isn't a lot negative to say about it. Just some of the objectives in the expert variant, which is to me the real way to play, don't feel very balanced in terms of their point value versus how hard they are to pull off. But you can always play with the family objectives, replacing those ones, but still keep all the extra stuff of the expert variant. I think that would probably almost be the best way to go. And that beginning is slow. But if you can get through that beginning, then by a third of the way, midway through the game, you get a really, really interesting game that's really, really fun, and you are definitely playing with the other players. You can't see their objectives, but there are things you can see. You can see what values they have left. You can see that they're really strong in that district, so they're probably going to get points for that, but maybe I'm close. Maybe I can try to compete with that, right? Or they have the Metro card. Maybe I could take that away from them. Lots of interaction. And it's a non-confrontational interaction. So in many ways, it feels like those old school German style games that I always like, even though the company was French, the designer was Swiss, French speaking Swiss. So let's call it a French game, but it definitely has that sort of the old German style quality that I've always appreciated. So Metropolys is a recommendation, but check the art, make sure you can be satisfied with that. And if you're not planning on seeking out an old copy of this, the reason I'm covering Metropolys today is because on Kickstarter at the time of recording, and the time this video is released, it should be live, is a new version of Metropolys called Skyrise. Now, Skyrise still lists Sébastien Pauchon as one of the designers, but also with two principals, let's say, of Roxley Games as co-designers. And Roxley are definitely making a point. They're really stressing that Skyrise is a completely different game than Metropolys. To which I say, yeah, I mean, they can say whatever they want, right? Because Metropolys is a good game, I think they're nervous about Skyrise as compared to Metropolys. So they're really stressing like, oh, this is a different game. Yes, this part of Metropolys was good, and we changed it to this other thing. And why did we do that? Did we make it worse? No. It's a different game. How can you even compare them? Let's talk about some of the differences in Skyrise. So, you can't start an auction anywhere you want. You can only start it in the middle or next to an existing building. Now, that rule isn't really necessary, although it does limit some of the analysis paralysis that I find some people sometimes have at the beginning of the game, because it's just the beginning of the game is just so wide open and you can do whatever you want. At least at the beginning, this adds a little bit of restriction. Completely unnecessary, though. It's split into 2 rounds, and the buildings are split. So you have a certain amount of buildings in the first age, I guess, and then at the second age you get the rest of your buildings, and there's an intermediate scoring. One of the buildings you get in the second age is called a wonder, which on the one hand, you can always play your wonder. It always wins an auction, and when you play a wonder, you will be able to play a wonder card. You'll be able to choose a number of wonder cards, I think, at the beginning of the game. And when you build your wonder, you pick one to play, and it'll either give you some end-game scoring or even like a special ability for the rest of the game. Well, to me at least, that's a downgrade. Just what I need when I'm playing this game is to have a couple of cards, and it's like, oh, again, you know, the beauty of Metropolys was that you had a small number of objectives, and so once you learn them, that becomes a part of the game, is guessing what objectives other players have. Instead of everybody getting a secret objective for a secret color, every game players are collecting these tokens that are of the colors of the neighborhoods. As you're collecting tokens, the values of that color to you go up. I think at some point they actually start to go down again. So I'm sure that's kind of interesting. It feels like a lateral change to me, not necessarily better or worse. I personally think I would prefer the simplicity of Metropolys's just secret color scoring, not having played it, of course. It feels like there would be that extra element of detachment from what the other players are doing. Because, you know, certainly you can see like, oh, that player is strong in green, so I don't want them to get another green neighborhood. You can definitely do that. But then you have that point where actually if you get even more tokens, the value is going down again. So to me, it almost feels like don't even bother thinking about that unless you've played it a bunch. But I don't know, it might not be worse or better, just different. Now, one thing that I'm very confident is an improvement are the secret objectives. I'm not sure if they tweak the values, but they're basically the same type of things. And instead of each player getting a secret objective, you shuffle up the 5, I think they're called panorama cards. You shuffle them up and flip over 2, and that's 2 that everybody can score, not just you. I think that's a great improvement, and I actually look forward to trying that with my old copy of Metropolys and see if that, because like I said, those expert variant hidden objectives, not the colors, but the other ones, feel a bit off to me, and I think it would improve it to have those ones open instead of secret. Now, one interesting thing is that in this game, the game ends as soon as one player builds all their buildings. Not the case in Skyrise. In Skyrise, the first player to get all their buildings out simply gets a bonus number of points. And a 3 or 4 player game, second place will get a smaller bonus. But everybody then continues playing until all their buildings are built. I mean, I guess I have to see it in action, but I'm not very excited about that change. To me, there's a big tension in the game if somebody is close to getting rid of all their buildings, and you still have buildings that you want to get on the board, and you have feel that stress, you know, of will I be able to get my buildings out, you know, before they finish the game, and that removes the tension. Now you could argue, okay, but getting out first gives you a big 10-point bonus, right? That's good, right? It's like, yeah, that's good. I know I won't feel the same level of tension, because now whether it's a good or bad thing is completely obfuscated. If I get out early, I will get a 10-point bonus. If I get out third in a 4-player game, I won't get any bonus, but by getting more of my buildings on the board, I might be able to score points in other ways. So maybe it's a wash. So maybe I don't really care. Just from my personal preference, I think that would lose some tension for me compared to Metropolys's one player gets out, it's over. And I like that tension, and I think you would lose that in Skyrise. The original game just had Sébastien Pauchon as a designer, and certainly there were people who play tested with him, and there were possibly developers at Ystari that maybe made some suggestions, made some tweaks, but still the design was considered his. And now you have Skyrise. I wonder how involved Pauchon was with the new version, because if most of the design changes came from him, I would think he would still be listed as the sole designer. And the other two, the Roxley staff, would be listed as developers. But it's not. They're listed as co-designers. So, okay, so all the changes in Skyrise are probably from the Roxley team. And then I have to wonder how involved Pauchon was. I'm not sure any of the ideas of the changes were his. Maybe they just like, hey, Sébastien, here's... or Seb. I know his friends call him Seb. Maybe they were like, hey, Seb, these are the changes we're going to make, okay? And Seb's like, all right. I mean, as long as he gets paid, I guess, right? Metropolys is done. I don't think a lot of companies were in a rush to reprint it. And Roxley was like, yeah, we'll reprint it, but we're going to change a whole bunch of stuff on our own. And maybe they just wanted to take this and make it into a bigger game. Feels like more of a hobby game, certainly more like a modern hobby game. And one change is the decision to make a deluxe edition. And if you have a chance, check out the deluxe edition, because sometimes I feel like I'm not even in the same hobby as some of these people anymore. Because they have a regular edition, which is cardboard, and it seems like it has, I think, wooden buildings. But then they have a deluxe edition. So the normal edition, $50 US. Deluxe edition, $75 US. Now for a 50% increase, what do you get? Well, you get custom plastic buildings and, oh boy, a plastic board. Oh my god, a plastic board. The actual molded plastic raised board. I'm amazed somebody even thought of this. It's like, where can we fit plastic in a game that's people never put into plastic before, right? You know, games like Daiwei notwithstanding, but like this sort of game, you don't need a plastic board. Great table presence. Why is table presence important to people? I mean, I can understand at a convention it can be important. You know, people will walk by and go, ooh, what's that? Right? But just at home, what does it matter? Do you need a plastic raised board for this when cardboard would do? I feel so disappointed. I'm curious. I would like to play Skyrise just to see whether my feelings turn out to be true. You know, if you don't want to search around, try to find Metropolys. I mean, Skyrise is probably better for most hobbyists anyway, certainly modern hobbyists. I will most likely stick with my version of Metropolys. It's got a nice, you know, typical, this is the sort of the typical rectangular box size. Is very common, doesn't take up a whole lot of space. I know the Roxley one will be a square and probably a thick square, so and this is the sort of more condensed version, which is usually what I want anyway. So I'm a fan of Metropolys, and if the game sounds interesting to you and you don't want to seek out a secondhand copy, no worries. Like I said, the Kickstarter is out now for Skyrise, and even if you're not into Kickstarter, wait for Skyrise to come to retail. And you may like Skyrise better than Metropolys. I am not as optimistic. I will be hanging on to my copy of Metropolys. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Metropolys don't stop being good just because newer games come out. Take care.